Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It's great to have you here today. It's the 5th of May, 2024, and today we're going to talk about sibilance. Sorry for that. This will be a fun topic. We'll make it fun, and let's just go to our agenda here and show you what we're going to cover today. Obviously, as always, this is a workshop which goes along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com. If you want to be alerted to the topics for the session the day before, we have them every Sunday. You can sign up for free at the school. Obviously, we have some courses over there for sale as well. So welcome to everyone that's able to join us here. Mark, great to have you here. Brad, yippee, I'm here for a live stream. It's good to have you here. Rag and Bone Puppet Theater, it's always good to have you here as well. And then Daniela, there you go. If you speak Romanian or are Orthodox, there's a happy Easter to you. So welcome, everybody. It's good to have you here. We are going to talk about sibilance and de-essing, de-ess processing. So this is a topic that was actually requested some time ago, and I saw it on the list yesterday, and I thought, yes, that's a perfect topic for today. Then when we're done, there were no questions that were submitted ahead of time, but we'll go to the chat and just have a little fun hanging out as Soundies. So there we go. We can have sibilance followed by plosive. There we go. And then Guy, great to have you joining us from upstate New York. All right. Well, first, you might ask yourself, what is sibilance? And that's a great question. And what are sibilants? You see it spelled a couple different ways. My understanding is sibilance is the broader term, talking about sibilance in general. Sibilance is the plural version of individual sibilant sounds. So you can see it spelled both ways. That's okay. Let's go ahead and take a look over here at a definition. It's kind of a technical definition, but it'll give us a start, and we can talk about it a little bit here. You can see I'm doing the switching here today. Over here on Wikipedia, they say sibilants are fricative consonants of higher amplitude and pitch made by directing a stream of air with the tongue towards the teeth. Examples of sibilants are the consonants at the beginning of the English words sip, zip, ship, and genre. The symbols, it talks about the international symbols that they use to identify them. Sibilants have a characteristically intense sound, which accounts for their paralinguistic use in getting one's attention. For example, calling someone using psst, or quieting someone's using shh. So that's the general idea. You can go and dig in and get all sort of linguistics background on all of this. It has to do with the shape of the tongue, the shape of the mouth, how people articulate things, everyone's a little bit different, and some voices tend to have or exhibit or produce more sibilance than others. My voice, as it turns out, produces a good quite a lot of sibilance, actually. And so when I'm choosing a microphone for myself, I have to be kind of careful and find a microphone that kind of fits my voice. Now, that's not the only thing. There's some other things to consider. So certain microphones do emphasize sibilance. And let me give you one example here. I'm going to switch back over to the Mac. This is the frequency response chart for the Sennheiser MKH416 shotgun microphone. And you can see here, it has a little bit of a boost in these kind of mid-high frequencies. And I would say that sibilance typically occurs between 5 and 8 kilohertz. That's not the only place it happens, but generally it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 8 kilohertz. And you will notice there is a frequency boost, or this microphone is more sensitive, I should say, in between it starts to ramp up at about 4 kilohertz. By 5 kilohertz, it's boosted a little over 2 dB, and then by the time you get to about 7 kilohertz, it's about 4 dB more sensitive. So it's definitely potentially emphasizing sibilance quite a bit when it comes to spoken word or singing, vocals, or anything of that nature. So there's a little bit of a boost there. So the microphone that you use can make a difference as well. To a smaller extent, I would say that the preamplifier that you're using could also boost it. Usually, some preamplifiers can. Especially some that are more brittle, described as brittle sounding. Although again, my experience has been the microphone usually imparts the biggest influence there, aside from the voice that you're miking. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to sibilance. The trick with sibilance is that in and of itself, it's not a problem, but it can sound rather harsh on certain voices in particular. Let me demonstrate here. I have right here, I have the Schoeps CMC 641. It's the Colette with the MK41 capsule on it, which is the supercardioid capsule. Listen to this. Let's just give you a little sample. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Now, I'm really sorry to do that to you. And I don't know, some of you that you may be more sensitive to that than others, but that's an example of the sort of sizzling, harsh sound that you can get, and you may be even hearing it now in my voice here with the Earthworks microphone as well. But those are some things that definitely influence the overall experience for your listeners. And the question is, how do you tame it when it's too harsh? Well, there are a few things, and the first thing I would generally recommend is first, if you're processing the signal, either for a live event or for pre-recorded material that you're doing post-processing on, first, I generally try to find the sibilance. And it's going to, as I mentioned before, somewhere between 5 and 8 kilohertz is pretty common. So that's the first thing I do. And the way I will typically do that, well, there are a couple ways you can do it. You can do it with a de-esser plugin. You can use an EQ as well. Boost up one of the parameters on an EQ and sweep it between 5 and 8 kilohertz. And when it sounds the harshest, that's probably where the bulk of that person's sibilance sits. Now, I should also mention one thing too. I generally think of a lisp as the inverse of sibilance. So if you have a lispy voice, you probably do not want to apply a de-esser, and you probably do maybe want to use a brighter microphone that does have a little bit of a boost in those higher frequencies. Danny's voice is one example that tends to be, she doesn't have an out-and-out lisp, but she definitely does not have sibilance. And so I generally find that some of my brighter microphones work better when we're miking her voice. So that's one thing you can do. We'll demonstrate how to find the sibilance a little bit more in just a moment here. Then, once I found that frequency, I generally try to apply the de-esser at that center frequency. And basically what a de-esser is, it's a limited frequency range compressor. So you apply it in the place where the sibilance is happening, and it basically just compresses that sibilance when it occurs within the spoken word. And then it releases and you don't hear it anymore after that. So that's generally what a de-esser does. Some of them are more sophisticated than others. We'll look at one in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight, just as an example. One of the things I do is that when I'm adjusting the threshold, again, because a de-esser typically operates like a compressor, it has a threshold, a point at which it starts to engage. What I do is I generally will push that threshold quite a lot until the voice starts to sound lispy. When you start to hear that lisp, then that's when you know you've applied too much, and then it's time to back it off a little bit. So that's generally how I do it with my ears. I find I work best that way. I'm able to find it, push it really, really hard, and they go, okay, wait, that's way too much, and then back off until, you do need to hear some sibilance because that's part of articulation. You don't want to destroy it, but what you want to do is make it so that it's not harsh to listen to, especially if you're listening to something that's a little bit longer. So that's where... that's kind of my general approach. So with that, let's go over to the Mac and take a look here. I'm going to get everything switched appropriately this week. There we go. This is DaVinci Resolve Fairlight. And in here I have a simple recording that I made with the Schoeps, and it sounds like this. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. Before I do that, let's just make sure we have this at a good loudness. I'm going to analyze the audio levels. We're at -23. That's good. Okay, here we go. This is the Schoeps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh, that's brutal. Okay. um, I hope not to offend your ears too much in today's session, but we do need to demonstrate what sibilance is and how it can sound a little bit harsh. Now, I'm curious in the chat here, is anyone hearing that sibilance? Is anyone not hearing? Actually, maybe let me know this. Are you not hearing the sibilance in my voice? And let me just kind of check in on the chat. Guy asked a question, how can you prevent sibilance during the recording time? I would say two main ways. Number one is to choose a microphone that doesn't emphasize the 5 to 8 kilohertz range too much. That's one thing. Sometimes putting a foam cover over the microphone, preferably one that's designed for the microphone, that's not too likely to cut off a lot of those sibilants, but sometimes that can help. Using a de-esser on your mixer or your recorder is another way you can do it during recording time. Positioning the microphone can make a difference as well. Some people suggest moving the microphone down more towards the throat so you're not picking up as much of that high frequency content from the mouth. Here's the thing about sound that's very interesting is that higher frequencies tend to be very directional and lower frequencies tend to be more omnidirectional. So because sibilants are a little bit on the higher on the frequency range, they tend to be a little bit more directional. So I have found, I've heard advice from, and I've tried myself, either moving the microphone down more towards the throat, or actually in some cases moving it up above the mouth a little bit. Now you have to be careful and again, use your ears to hear what sounds the best, but those are some techniques, Guy, that you can use while recording. Okay. Here's another interesting word, fricative. Yes, it's almost like onomatopoeia indeed. All right. Eric, I've apologized that you feel triggered. This is where we're going. Brad mentions the best use of S sibilance in a song, to my knowledge, is Taylor Swift's "Anti-Hero." It seems like Derek is who is Taylor Swift. Good one, Derek. And of course, Brad's response is melting happy face. Good. Daniela says a good plugin is OTT. And then using iLok. By the way, those that are not familiar with iLok, iLok is essentially a security app that allows you to, that you often need for some third-party plugins to purchase and authorize them for use on your computer. There's traditionally been a lot of piracy of audio plugins over the years. And so a lot of the manufacturers now are using iLok and have been actually for quite a long time. Matt says, having used the DBX286S for decades, you just learn what works and what doesn't. These new kids who only use software controls, I think it harder to understand, but that's just old Matt talking. Well, I think that what it does come down to for sure is that you use your ears, and the new kids should be using the ears too. We definitely have people hearing it. And that's an interesting point Daniela makes. Chinese mics do heavily emphasize it. There are some of this, I find that the German mics, some of them are a little brighter as well. Not necessarily, but I find that, like, for example, the Neumann and the Schoeps Sennheiser can be a little bit bright for my voice, potentially. So anyway. All right, let's go there. Let's hold it there. So let's talk about using a de-esser in this case. But before we do that, let's use an EQ to find where the sibilance is. So let's get your headphones out. I'm switching over to the Mac very intentionally today. And here we are back on the Mac. Let's put it in. Let's see here. I want it to repeat. I'm going to go ahead and play, and I'm going to bring up the EQ. I am going to boost one of the points and sweep it back and forth between 5 and 8 kilohertz to find where the sibilance is occurring. So here we go. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh, that's brutal. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh. Okay, think we found it. It actually spans a good portion of that whole range, but I think the worst of it we found somewhere right around here, 5.7K. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's run with that and let's see what happens when we bring it over into our de-esser. So to get our de-esser, we're going to come up here to the effects and we have a de-esser right here. I'm going to go ahead and just drop it on the track right here. And here's our de-esser. Now this is a pretty straightforward de-esser. Some are even simpler than this. Some are more sophisticated than this. But what you can do here is you can set your frequency all the way down to 700 hertz. Wow. That's really low, all the way up to 9 kilohertz. And you can change the shape of it. You can be a little bit steeper of a curve, a wider curve, or even just a low shelf, or a high shelf, excuse me. So you can be, this is different. I would say this represents different amounts of aggressiveness. And so let's go ahead and start with the least aggressive here. This looks like it's the amount. So this is kind of like a threshold. You can choose how aggressive you want to be there. You can also choose the reaction time. So you can go slow, medium, or fast. So let's go ahead and start with medium. Let's go ahead and put it where we found most of my sibilance, right around 5.7. I think we found it. Right in there is probably good enough. And we're going to start with none, and then I'm going to apply it more heavily. So let's go ahead and do that and see how we sound. Again, remember the strategy I typically use is I go really heavy, way too far, and then back off. And the idea here is, again, I want to mellow out the sibilants. I don't want to eliminate or destroy them. They do help with articulation, so you don't want to get rid of them. And if you do get rid of them, you'll start to sound lispy. So here we go. That's brutal. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh, that's brutal. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh, that's brutal. Okay, so there's one way to do it. You notice when I changed it to fast and I had it at 100%, it did, well, first of all, the fast algorithm it was creating some artifacts. I don't know what that was about. It sounded kind of crackly. But it also eventually gave me what sounded very much like a lisp. So instead of having the kind of harshness of sibilance, you ended up with a lisp instead. So it's a trade-off there, and you want to be careful about it. I might actually go wide on this one. I've got quite a bit going on there. Let's do another round here. I'm also going to try out the slow reaction time just to see what that does. But let's keep going. A little bit more example. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Ooh, that's brutal. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. Okay, I would end up probably somewhere around there. Again, my voice has quite a bit of sibilance, but this is probably a pretty close to what I would do. Somewhere either slow or medium, somewhere around 50% and around 5.7K. I actually, the wider one was a little better, I felt like, in terms of managing the overall sibilance. You want to do as little processing as possible. Generally, that's the kind of the approach that you'd want to take generally with plugins in general. One note when it comes to sibilance as well, that once you compress your audio, if you are going to be doing any sort of a compression, that can have a tendency to emphasize the sibilance, and especially if you use just a massive single band compressor, because what happens in that case is that if you typically look at, actually, let me go back and show you. I'm going to disable. Let's go back to the Mac really quickly. I'm going to disable the. Here it is. Okay, I'm going to disable the de-esser, and I'm going to bring up the equalizer. Let's go ahead and just play back and look at the frequency response curve that shows in the background. And thank you, Blackmagic Design, for adding that to the equalizer. Ooh, that's brutal. All right, checking 1, 2. She sells seashells by the seashore. This is the Sheps Colette 6 with the MK41 capsule. It's supercardioid. She sells seashells by the seashore. By the seashore, she sells seashells. One thing you can see is that a lot of the energy in voices tends to be kind of in the low and mid frequencies, just in terms of pure amplitude. And what that means in practical terms is that when you apply a single band compressor, sometimes you're generally compressing more of the lower frequencies, and so those higher frequencies, the sibilance can start to stand out a little bit more. So once you, I was going to say it's a slippery slope. Once you start applying some, different types of processing, you have to kind of carefully accommodate each of them to each other. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you are applying compression, is that you can start to create more sibilance as well. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's go to the chat and see what's going on over there. I haven't been paying attention to that. Here's a separate question, not sibilance, but I think it's a fine one. How far can you place a boom mic from talent and still have it usable? Thinking wide shots in film. Well, there are a number of factors, Derek. Number one is, are you trying to create perspective? If you are, backing off is actually a good thing because it creates that perspective. It makes it feel like the listener is farther away from the sound source, whatever that may be. So that's one thing. It's sort of a subjective, artistic decision. Secondly, it depends on the microphone. Some microphones have more reach. Really what that means is they have either more directional or less directional polar patterns. So that can make quite a bit of difference as well. And that's a difference too between a long shotgun microphone versus a medium versus a short shotgun microphone. The longer they are, the more reach they have. So if you need to be able to reach a little farther, as they say, then a longer shotgun microphone may be more useful in keeping that very clear, isolated sound. But a lot of times, again, boom operators and production sound mixers are making intentional decisions about, hey, this is a wide shot. We want it to sound wide. So back that microphone off. We're going to just stick with our medium shotgun mic, and that's the perspective we want. So that can be a perfectly valid decision as well, and definitely result in usable sound. So hopefully that gives a little perspective on that. All right, here's Christopher. I understand your sentiments here. Christopher says, I get the need to protect against piracy, but iLok is bad and more often prevents you from getting are using the software you paid for than not. I will never buy iLok protected products. I do have some iLok protected plugins. Yeah, it's not ideal, and it's sometimes a little bit of a pain to work with. But on the other hand, the product people and the engineers at the software companies that make the plugins, they have to eat too. They need to get paid. So I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, it is a bit of a pain sometimes. Here's an interesting one from AudioBuff. In live sound, I use brighter horns to help punch through the clutter of the room. By horns, I assume you mean the speakers, the tweeters on the speakers, or the horns, as they're often called in loudspeakers. So I have to be careful with 5 to 8 kilohertz so I don't cause the ears to bleed. Just like mics, speakers make a difference. Great point, Jude, on that. That makes a huge, huge difference when you're reinforcing sound for live as well. All right. Matt says, if I have anything to do with it, every mic in a live environment has an EQ and a 286S, most likely something newer or more advanced. Very good. All right. For the cost, one could buy a DBX 286 and just use it wherever. Derek asks, is that a hardware component? Yes. So the DBX 286, I've actually got one right here, but I don't have a camera on it. It is a rack mount vocal strip. So it has a preamplifier, a compressor, a de-esser, an enhancer, and an expander / noise gate on it. So it's a single channel. It's usually really good for talking, like if you're going to do in studio talking head, or if you're going to be live, it can be a really nice processor for live. It's not, I think they run, last time I checked, they're less than $300, although when I bought mine, it was $220, and they've gone up since then. I bought mine probably in 2018 or somewhere around there. I think they've gone up in price, but I think they're still less than $300. So that's just some context there. Here's an interesting point from Mark. I really wish DBX would make a small version, bag size. That's a clever idea. Oh, Camille, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Thomas asked, does the DaVinci de-esser have look ahead? Is all the transients still getting through? So I don't know that it has look ahead. There's nothing explicit that says yes or no about that, but it does have different reaction times, the slow, medium, fast. I think with the slow, some of the transient is going to get through. With the medium, probably less, and with the fast, probably even less. So while it's not necessarily look ahead, it does have a different reaction times that you can set, which is interesting. Mark says, was a CMC mic on a boom above you? It was in my arm, boomed like this. So I put it in a traditional kind of tight shot position for a boom mic when I made that recording. Here's a great question from Guy. Would you say that the DBX 286 works better than software plugins? Interesting. And I think there could be a day-long debate on this, but I'm interested. Matt, Matt responds, we like our rack mount stuff. I think it's a huge question. Going back to Guy's question, would you say the DBX 286 works better than software plugins? I can give you my perspective on that. I'm sure everyone else has a perspective as well, but I would say it's not better necessarily at an objective level, but I think it can be a tool that some people prefer. And I very much, when I'm doing live sound, I like having analog processors, or at least having, in this case today, for example, we're using the DLZ as our mixer, and it has processing built into it. So for those situations, I definitely like having something where I can set those. I don't feel like, I don't know that there's a clear winner. I think it depends on what you're doing. In production sound for film and TV, typically, they're not applying a lot of real-time effects. They're just capturing raw audio to give to the post team, who will then, of course, use plugins, or in some cases, they may use analog outboard gear. Although I think at this point, most of them are probably using doing all of the mix in the box, as they say, which means on a computer, not using any sort of analog outboard gear. And they're using plugins of some sort. Okay. Brad has another question. As we're going through this, I'm wondering how to manage this when applied to multi-speaker scenarios. I imagine best case is separate audio capture for each voice. What about using OmniMic? Let me address the first one. So yeah, normally you have the settings dialed in per person. So if it's a music performance, obviously each person that will be singing will have their own microphone. And so within that channel, you will dial in the settings for that individual person typically. On digital mixers, you can also set up what are called scenes in many cases. And so if you have, maybe you have one set of performers that are going to do one song and then exit the stage, and then another set of performers are going to do the next one, you could set up a scene for each of them. You could set up a separate mic for each of them. It depends on how you want to approach it, but often, yeah, the settings are actually unique to each voice or each instrument, even in some cases. So, all right. Daniela says, OTT is a multiband compressor where you can, very good filter. I always get a very good sound from the Sennheiser Bandit. Okay, cool. Yeah, multi-band compressors are another thing you can use and set them up as a way to process sibilance, because what a multi-band compressor allows you to do is you can have different compression settings for different frequency ranges. So I have actually, in our Adobe Audition class, in fact, we showed how to use the multi-band compressor to compress the higher frequencies independent of the lower frequencies. And the big part of the reason we do that is to manage sibilance. Okay. Camille says, for live broadcast, your voice must be processed directly. Which plugins are recommended for Universal Audio Apollo? Oh, there are so many, Camille. I can tell you what I use. Sometimes if I just want a simple compressor, I have a microphone that's pretty well suited to my voice. I might just use the LA2A, which is one of the free plugins for Apollo. I also have purchased the Voxbox plugin for Apollo, which is basically a channel strip as well. So it's a compressor and there's kind of a really simple EQ and a de-esser on it as well. That's another one that I use, and that one's used a lot in music as well. It's quite popular. Yeah, those are probably the two that I look at. Some people like to use the Pultec EQ, which is a very different type of EQ, kind of a vintage style push-pull kind of thing. That's probably worth another entire episode to talk about that. But those can be really useful as well. Some of those kind of vintage style EQs. Okay, cool. This is Matt's response in regards to the DBX 286. I'm old. I like physical knobs over software. The 286 is standard for the one I've used with my Shure Axient lavs, $5,000 per channel. We're about $1,000 per channel. Yeah, so there's very much a difference in terms of how people prefer to work. Some people like those physical controls. And Matt mentions that the DBX 286 is currently $290 on B&H. Wow, that's gone up quite a bit in price. Here's another note here from Danielle about iLok. Again, there are two different ways to do iLok. You can get a USB key that you plug into the computer, so that makes it a little bit more transportable. So if you're going to be working on different computers, you can put your iLok on a USB iLok device, just plug it into the computer, and then whatever plugins you have licensed or authorized, you can take from computer to computer. And you don't have to have an online or an internet connection to authorize you every time you use them, I should say. However, if you run the app, which is an alternative to having the physical USB key, then I believe you do have to be connected. And then in those cases, I think you have to authorize it to a computer. I'm not sure, but you can unauthorize it and then reassign it to another computer. It's just kind of a pain. And it can leave you high and dry. But those are some more thoughts on iLok. Um, Analog processors with a dial potentiometer. Spin it left, spin it right, and listen each step of the way. Yes, there's a beauty to that for sure, Eric. Derek asks this, looking at the DBX286, can Fairlight route out to a unit like that for editing? Yes, it can. Although I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. If you want that very specific sound, I suppose you could. But generally, I have found, and other people have, this is my opinion, 100% subjective, Curtis's opinion. It gets pretty complex when you start doing stuff like that. But yes, I think you can do that. And you can with most other DAWs. Right. Michael J., thanks for joining us. Wild and crazy, folks. Okay. I think there's a general consensus here that people are not fans of iLok, and I understand that perspective. Okay, good. If you have any other questions, go ahead and tag it in the chat here with @CurtisJuddAudio. We pretty much covered everything I wanted to as far as Sibilance is concerned for today, so would love to have a nerdy discussion with you. Today, I don't know if you can hear it. You're probably hearing a fan in the ATEM or a fan in the light, more likely. And I forgot to turn on my overhead light. I just remembered. Let's do this properly. One moment. There we go. What a difference, huh? All right. All right, here's a good point from Christopher. External inserts in Fairlight or any digital audio workstation breaks the latency compensation that digital audio workstations do, and you may have to fiddle to get things to line up again. Great point. And in fact, a lot of analog gear will have word clock ports on them to make sure that you can keep everything in sync. So yeah, you do introduce some additional issues, Derek, in terms of routing stuff outside of a digital audio workstation like Fairlight and then bringing it back in. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Christopher says, what ambisonic mic are you playing with? Mentioned last week on the weekly live. So I have the Sennheiser Ambio, but what I'm mostly focused on right now is the post-production of Atmos sound. That's what that or using ambisonics to make binaural mixes. Those are the things that I'm kind of interested in right now. But I do have the Sennheiser Ambio, which is seems pretty good in the tests I've done so far. All right, Matt says, did you see the hot shoe interface to the DJI Mic 2 that DJI released? I have not. Is it new? I know that they have a kind of an interface on it, so it's not surprising to me that they did that. But I have not seen it yet. I imagine they have to make a different interface for each camera brand, is my assumption. But that looks interesting. Daniela Daniela has a very interesting setup here. On my boat is a video and sound studio. So they have, I believe it's a sail. Is it a sailboat, Daniela? I don't remember. There are guests we online destroy from 4,000 kilometers away. The virtual server and remote in a new build is needed. The phone server recognizes each. So yeah, that wouldn't work too well with iLok, at least with the app that has to be online. All right. Okay, from Christopher, I'm messing with the Voyage Audio Spatial Mic Dante for a gig, but their plugin doesn't work in Fairlight. You get digital hash out of it. Ooh, that's a bummer. Okay, here's from Matt. Yes, so the digital interface for DJI mic is for Sony. No need to plug in the wire. That's actually kind of a nice setup. And of course, the popular camera right now is the Sony. All the cool YouTuber kids definitely are using Sony cameras. It seems like. I feel like I'm this old curmudgeonly dude out there still using Canon C70s and Canon C200s. But in any case. All right. AudioBuff has a really good question, and this actually goes back to the topic of sibilance. Does the Shure Twinplex have a presence boost cap? The Duraplex does, and with my horns, high frequency, it's too much and does not sound natural. The Twinplex, aside from the TL48, the TL47s do. Yes, you can have interchangeable caps to change their high frequency response. The TL48 does not have that, so it's a two-part answer there. But yeah, that definitely, if you're especially in those live environments when you're getting the sound filling the space from the loudspeakers and the performers themselves, you have to be really careful about how those respond. This is actually a good illustration of why when you go to a live event and you want to make a recording and you plug into the soundboard, what you get from the soundboard may sound really bizarre because you're getting this very isolated mix that's made for the physical space where they're reinforcing the sound with loudspeakers. So what you may get on a recording off of the board can sound otherworldly, like not great at all. So what I've learned is that if I'm going to do one of those recordings, I like to put room mics up as well to kind of give me that option as well. I think, and oftentimes the room mic actually sounds better. It sounds like if you have a good mixer that you're working with, a good front of house mix engineer, usually those room mics will sound pretty good, possibly better than what you're getting directly off the board, because the board doesn't have any of the room interaction going on. So there could be really weird EQ curves that they're using to manage feedback or something like that. So, or to kind of just tune it to the room. And so it can sound really, really bizarre. But great point. Thanks for sharing that, Jude. Here's a good question from Rag and Bone. Has anyone used the Sonable Smart De-ess? I have not. But interested to hear if others have. All right. Matt says, us old guys are using Sony also. So it's just this guy that's not using Sony. I love Canon camcorders, but dislike Canon DSLR and mirrorless. Weird, I know that the C70 is a great camera if it didn't have to be a Canon. Again, this is a situation, and this is true of a lot of gear. If it works well for you and you learn the gear well and you like how it works ergonomically, that's going to get you a better result. And so that's what you should probably stick with. And if you, I don't dislike Sony. Probably the Sony cameras today are probably much better. I bought a Sony some number of years ago, probably 2016 or 17. And back then, one of the mirrorless cameras, it was 2016. It was when the A6000 first came out, and the menu system was a disaster. It was a nightmare. And I've heard that they've gotten much better since then, but the Sonys definitely had the vibe back then of being made by an engineer for an engineer. And they were just kind of bizarre how the menus were laid out. I'm sure they're much better now. I'm sure, and again, lots of people are making great imaging with Sony cameras, so I don't begrudge them that at all. I'm invested in Canon. Canon works for me, and so I'm sticking with it. I will reconsider when it's time to go buy a new camera. I'll go look at something else and just see if something else may be a better fit. But I'm also not going to rush out and sell a perfectly capable camera that's serving me and serving my purposes really well right now to get something that may or may not. So here's what Eric says. I don't care how old the camera is. If you got it set up, know how to color shade it, and it never lets you down during a live stream, keep it running. And then yes, to Matt's point, oh yes, the menu system are bad, but they fixed it on the FX3. Oh, here we go. Mark says, I'm old and I've been using Nikon Z8s. I twist the opposite direction from that rough. And then Keith said, I started with Sony, then Panasonic, then Canon, back to Sony. Yeah, and that's actually probably an interesting, not an unusual journey there, Keith. I actually started with a Canon DSLR, the Canon 60D, if you remember that. And then I did Blackmagic cameras for a while. I had a Nikon that did video. I was never that happy with the video on the Nikons. I got a Panasonic back then. This was a D750 or D600. I think it was a D600. Anyway, then I got a Panasonic GH4, then a Panasonic GH5, then a GH5S, and we actually still use those Panasonics for the overhead camera when we use that here on the live stream, and for some of our B-roll for our YouTube's videos as well. So anyway, we do whatever works is how I look at it. Christopher says, channeling Bandrew, use what you have and works. Don't chase the latest shiny because it's the latest shiny. Absolutely. That's what my experience has taught me as well. How did we get started talking about cameras? Brad says, I started off as a Canon shooter in the late 2000s, held off for a long time getting into video, and switched to Sony when the A6400 took YouTube by storm. Sony autofocus took over the past decade. Yeah, it is actually. Their autofocus system is fantastic. The Canon Cinema autofocus is also quite good, which is why I moved to Canon when I did. I moved actually from a Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro to a Canon C200 at that time, and then later added a Canon C70. And Michael J says, I'm not old, just saying. Oh, good. And then Keith had, Keith, you've been doing this for a little while then, if you had Sony Betacam and Panasonic DVC Pro. Wow. Here's a good question from Camille. Which products do you regret purchasing and which ones do you recommend or are on your wish list? Oh, that's a really broad question, but I can tell you, I do regret buying, and this is not that it's going to be a regret for anyone else, but I do regret buying the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro. I thought that, and it was a good camera. I learned a lot with it, but it wasn't the right fit for me and the type of work that I do. So we ended up starting to do a lot more corporate video, and some of our clients wanted the ability to move around quite a bit, and it's a big, heavy camera. And and we had the shoulder mount and everything. But then manually focusing, excuse me, just we needed something that had autofocus and that worked really, really well. So we looked at Canons and we looked at Sonys. Excuse me. And at the time, I already had some Canon glass that I really liked that we were actually incidentally using with the Blackmagic camera. And so that's why I ended up over on Canon cameras. But I do regret, I guess I don't regret it, and I do regret it. I learned a lot from that camera. I learned that I don't really have a pure cinema workflow. Like an Arri Alexa would be the worst camera for me. It doesn't make any sense. And I would say for 99% of people that are not actually filming for cinema, that an Arri Alexa is probably the wrong choice. There are so many ergonomic and practical things about that camera. It's a beautiful camera that produces absolutely stunning imagery, but it's the wrong practical choice for so many of us. So, including myself. And I think I look at the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro and the later iterations of that. There was the G2 and then there was the 12K. And now I think there's the newest one, whatever they're calling that newest one, Ursa Mini Cinema, or what, I don't remember what they call it, but it has up to a 17K sensor now, I think. I think for certain people that's a great fit, but for me, with the type of work I do, I don't have a focus puller with me all the time, so that autofocus is a pretty important one to me. I think also, yeah, that's probably the main consideration. I think when you get to some of the other cinema cameras, power becomes a pretty serious thing as well. Like you start investing a ton of money in cinema batteries. I understand that. I don't know if the newer versions of Alexa are this way, but the older versions of Alexa were really power hungry. And same with the Reds. They just sucked through batteries. And so you had to have pretty big batteries to power them, which meant you had to have multiple batteries. Plus, you needed to be able to charge them, while you're filming, one scene. You need to have a couple of other batteries on the charger, charging up quickly. And when you're chewing through batteries like that, it gets costly. Like I have my favorite cinema batteries are these Anton Bauer's or the gold mount batteries, and they take a while to charge. You can fast charge them. The fast charger was like $700 and some just for the charger. So it's just a different set of consideration. And in the context of a film production, an Arri Alexa is a drop in the bucket of the overall budget. So it's not like, for them, it's like, okay, this gets the imagery we want, and we have the crew to manage it and to do it. So let's do it. But if you're a solo operator or just a very small crew, it becomes a lot less useful. So that's one thing. Camille, what are some other things? Let me think about audio gear. This may get some people riled up, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I wouldn't say I regret it, because obviously I wanted to cover it, but the Rodecaster Pro 2 is, if I have a choice, which I do, between using a Rodecaster Pro 2 to do a live show or the Mackie DLZ, either the original or the XS, the smaller one, I would definitely choose the Mackie every single time. So I don't regret buying the Rodecaster. I mean, obviously I'm making a course on it right now. I had several videos reviewing it for people, and I bought it with my own money. I don't regret it, but if I have a choice, I would definitely choose the Mackie instead. So that's an example there. On the microphone front, I don't end up using this microphone very much. This is the Schoeps CMC 641. Some people will tell me I'm crazy for that maybe, but I just don't really love the sound of it relative to a lot of other microphones, so I don't use it that much. It's a good reference if I'm doing a review of a pencil condenser microphone for booming, but it doesn't get a lot of use other than that, to be honest. If I have someone with a very, very dark voice, I might use it in their case. And it is what I find is a lot of these classic microphones, I think this also applies to the Neumann U87. That's another microphone that's like, I could take it or leave it. Now that I have one and I've used it on my voice in particular, take it or leave it. It EQs really well. And that's what I was going to say, is that that's the same with the Schoeps, is that it captures the sound in a way that's not flattering right there on the spot. It's certainly not for my voice, but it EQs really well, and you can make it sound absolutely beautiful. Same with the Neumann U87, at least on my voice, is I felt like directly, with no processing, directly into an audio interface or a preamp or whatever to tracking, it doesn't sound that good. Actually, like a Rode NT1 Signature Series, a $160 microphone, actually sounds better on my voice directly into a track than the $3,600 Neumann U87 AI. The U87 AI can be EQ'd and it sounds beautiful once you EQ it. It also has some other tricks up its sleeve, to be fair. It's a multi-pattern mic, so you can change the patterns, the polar patterns on it. So anyway, there's a couple thoughts there, Camille. Hopefully that's helpful for you. Brad says this about Canon cameras. Canon seems to be playing catch up and keeps hobbling their mirrorless cameras in some small way that makes folks stick with Sony's or others. I think that's probably true. At work, we have a whole fleet of Canon C70s. We use them in studio, and they work great. Here at the Judd Studios, Canon C70 out there, Canon C200 here. It's doing the job. I don't really... Yeah, anyway, that's where I'm at on that. All right. Here, Linda, I'm team Sony, Canon, and Lumix. They all have their place in my heart. I also have trained on JVCs. No Nikon or Fuji yet. Blackmagic is fascinating. Love the usability. Yeah, I think, again, it's I'm with you, Linda. Whatever's doing the job for you is good. All right. There's a little bit of brotherly love going on in the form of punches here, verbal punches. Matt says, yes, Mark Holloway, that shows with you your mic purchases in the past. LOL. Context, Mark found that he had purchased a counterfeit MKH416 shotgun microphone. And the response, of course, is ouch. Hey, I own an MKH50 now, so I should be redeemed. Here's a good one from Derek. Can you talk about how you use your 888 for recording, specifically setting gain for each channel, then what you're listening for in the mix? Oh, good. Okay. We have actually talked about that a little bit in the past, but so obviously that's much more of a production sound field recorder mixer. They're doing some great things with that too, by the way. I'm really happy to see how it's evolved over the years. They just announced a new firmware that isn't released yet, but will have some additional things, including a routing matrix on an iPad or tablet. So you get a much bigger screen to set up your routing, which is nice. But in terms of 888, so I will say this, it's a little bit tragic. The 888 doesn't get nearly as much use as I would like it to get these days. My career changed quite a bit during the pandemic, or right at the pandemic, and in kind of in 2021. So before that, I was doing some freelance location sound jobs. I was also I was the unofficial video guy for the company at which I worked. And so we did a lot of location work at the offices there. And so that's when I upgraded it was right before the pandemic that I upgraded from the 633 to the 888. So I had I was actually considering upgrading to the 833, but decided to go with the 888 because of its Dante capability. So I didn't necessarily need a ton more channels, but I wanted Dante built into it. So I went with the 888 and we had the funds for it. So it was kind of a no-brainer. So we did that. But typically I will have a boom microphone and up to 4 channels. The biggest job I've ever did, I had 5 people on wireless mics. So I don't do a ton, I'm not doing like the 18 and 26 channels of wireless audio. I've never done a job like that. The biggest one I did was 5 channels. So that's kind of the setup. So I'll usually put the boom on channel 1, and then the lav mics go right after that in order. And I'm using the SL2 with 2 slot-in A20 receivers. So I get that. That's how I get the first 4 channels, and then I had to kind of hobble together a 5th channel that one job. So that's how I use it. I'm not usually since I'm operating solo, or I've had an assistant on a couple of occasions, but in that case, I'm not actively mixing during a take. So I just pretty much, it's a straight mix. And usually in a lot of the cases, the post-production team was not necessarily super sophisticated. It wasn't like they were going to do the type of thing you would see in cinema where they didn't have a dialogue editor and a sound effects editor and, so on and so forth, and then did a re-recording mix. It was more like video editors taking the audio and doing the edit and bringing the audio into the edit. So, or they might have a single person contract post-production person that they hired. So that's kind of the context for what I did. So I didn't do a ton of routing. The routing for me would be pretty simplistic. It would be routing to the output so that when I did have to provide wireless headphones or an IFB feed for somebody on set, whether it's a producer or the director or whomever, I could route them just, for example, the boom mic. If we were doing a take that didn't have the boom mic, then I could route just the lavaliers that I wanted, the wireless lavs that I wanted to route to them. So pretty simple, to be honest. And I think a lot of it too was to buy it to learn and to teach. So that was part of it as well. So setting gain, pretty straightforward. I'm often targeting somewhere around minus 24 to minus 18 peaks when I'm using the 888. and that just gives me plenty of headroom to work with. Oh, that new firmware, by the way, is supposed to also record to 32-bit float. And what's not clear to me is whether or not there are multiple analog to digital converters per input channel, or if it's just recording to a 32-bit float file format. I'm not 100% clear on that. But that's another thing they're adding to the firmware. So pretty straightforward. What am I listening for in the mix? Clean. I want clean, good sounding audio. I want to make sure that I'm booming so that I'm avoiding pickup of any ambient sound that I don't want in the recording. I'm listening for clothing rustle on the lavs. I'm making sure that the batteries are still running on the wireless packs. Kind of just the basics. Nothing too sophisticated from there. But that's how I approach that on the jobs that I do, again, which are pretty simple. All right. I'm just taking a sweep here. Oh, Sheriff Logs has some good input. EIPMA is a great channel to check for anything Dolby Atmos. They had Scott on who mixed Pinocchio in Dolby Atmos. Very cool. Oh, interesting. Here's some, are there any redheads here? Red camera, of course. Now Nikon, technically, I guess. Derek had a red kit, sold it. Didn't like how they iterated so quickly and never fell in love with their color. Interesting. Matt says, I like Fuji the best, but the X-T4 autofocus wasn't good enough. I want the GFX 102, but do I really need a 100 megapixel sensor and $12,000? Wow. Christopher has a red Komodo as a mess about thing, but I'm no cinematographer. And then Matt rented a Sony Venice for a project. The memory cards are $2,000 each, and had to rent those also. I don't have the 17K camera, and I know it's not a fit for me. I can say that as well. Michael J is in the DLZ camp as well. Same with Red Frame Tech. Matt says, I haven't got the Mackie, but from all I heard, it doesn't make sense to switch from the Rodecaster Pro 2. If you're happy with the Rodecaster, yeah, I'm with you. We have some love for Sheps. It goes all directions, people. It looks like we're at the top of the hour here, and I need to get going here. Let me just do a quick scan through. Oh, here, Mark says, if you ever need to replace your MKH416, I know a guy. Pretty sure mine's legit, Mark, so I'll keep you in mind if I ever need to offload that. But the reality is that I keep it as a reference for when I'm reviewing other shotgun microphones. Matt says, having to learn to do audio for video project from 5 decades ago, doing sound is a huge conversion. Yeah, that's a big jump, but all right. All right, friends, I think that's a good place to call it for today. Get out there, manage your sibilance, and make some great sound this week. Let me get things queued up so I can actually do this gracefully. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye.